I have been around long enough to have written about Roach Dinkeloo's addition to the Irwin Miller Bank in Columbus. So it was a pleasure to go back there yesterday afternoon and see it again. It's holding up. I did not get quoted. I wasn't snarky enough. I'm going to have to go reread that. At any rate, the house built for J. Irwin Miller, his wife Xenia Miller, and their 5 children, which has just opened to the public, is surely one of the most one of the most important house museums to arrive in our cultural sphere. The most important thing to note about the house in Columbus, completed in 1957 by Eero Saarinen with Kevin Roach as the senior designer, is that it is astonishingly intact. To be sure, a few changes have been made. Some things are, some of the artifacts are no longer there, but visiting the house is still entering a time capsule where the architecture, the interior design by Alexander Gerard, and the landscaping by Dan Kiley can offer telling glimpses into the state of modernism during this incredibly rich period of modern design. It should be said that the house reflects the client's intense participation from not only Irwin Miller, the patron of so much architecture in Columbus, but his wife Xenia, which brings up my approach to dealing with the house. I'm presenting 3 historical perspectives or ways of placing the house within 3 distinct contexts. I'm treating the house as an architectural rashomon so that its significance we can see how its significance changes and shifts depending on the way you discuss it. First, I want to present a straightforward architectural description of the house to give you an overall, what happened to it? Okay, to give you an overall idea of the design. Second, I'll place it within the context of progressive modern houses of the mid-20th century, including Mies van der Rohe's Farnsworth House of Plano, Illinois in 1951, Philip Johnson's Glass House of New Canaan, Connecticut in 1949, and Charles and Ray Eames's Santa Monica House of 1949 as well. Both modernist function and modernist tectonics play crucial roles in the development of these houses. Third, I would like to place the Miller House in the context of the formal historical analysis, specifically relating to an investigation undertaken by Aaron Schiller, a grandson of Irwin and Xenia Miller, who is a graduate student right now in architecture at Yale. His investigation concerns Palladio's architecture of the 16th century, particularly Palladio's use of the 9-square grid, rhythm, and proportion, and how these architectural principles underlie Saarinen's design for the Miller House. By doing so, Schiller shows not only how a Palladian legacy has informed the shaping of the Miller House design, but gives an insight into the nature of Saarinen's tectonic inventiveness in deploying modern construction techniques and functional requirements to enhance and invert classical motifs. Finally, I shall look at the house in the context, the history remembered by its users, specifically according to 2 of the children who grew up in the Miller House, Betsy Miller Melting and her brother Will Miller. As we can see from the house, from looking at this house, it is surprisingly low-key, while occupying 13 acres of gorgeous property. The 1-story structure, 80 by 100 feet in its ground floor dimensions, is basically a glass wall pavilion with blue-gray cleft panels. Okay. We'll see more of those. 5 by 8.5 feet in dimension against concrete block. It sits on a plinth that slightly removes the house from the soil and creates an open terrace. And its structure depends on 16 white-baked enamel steel columns supporting a 100 by 120-foot roof grid of steel double channels with skylights placed over the channels. The roof extends out on the 4 edges of the house to create a canopy of 10-foot wide perimeter terraces so that the skylight gives a disembodied floating quality to that cantilevered canopy. But more about that later. Although shielded by tall hedges from the street, the grounds were landscaped by Kiley so that the house overlooked an alley of trees to the rear. The lawn sloped about 800 feet down to the Flat Rock River, and Kiley's landscaping was precise, formal, created outdoor rooms of rectilinear spaces defined by planning that echoed the linearity of the house. The floor plan, as we see, is divided up into 4 zones of enclosed spaces at the corner. We have that, the kitchen, we have the master bedroom, the children's, and the guest zone. The guest room also includes a housekeeper's room. As Christopher Monkhouse has noted in a book, Eero Saarinen, Shaping the Future, 2006, the consistency of the materials is so remarkable that even the carport had the same travertine marble floors as the living areas. But the main event, of course, is the conversation pit, 15 by 15 feet, and designed by Alexander Gerard, who did all the interiors of the house. And you'll notice it's built-in seating. Though distinctive, it will probably not be making a comeback soon, but more about its, how it works later. It's a marble banquette with upholstery and a colorful palette, for which Gerard was known, and the upholstery was changed in the summer and the winter. The pit was entered by these wood steps, paddock wood steps, in the center of the house. The dining area, as we see to the right, featured a round marble table with Eames chairs and has a fountain in the center, and over that you see the chandelier. The skylit living space, 10 feet high, has a white plaster cylindrical fireplace with a clear glass base for the fire. I think the glass is right around there. It wraps around. Gerard designed a 50-foot-long rosewood storage wall to contain books, artifacts, folk art, and other objets d'art that extended into the sitting room, which had the television and stereo. And here we also see the master bedroom and then the boys' bedroom on the right, which features built-in modular furniture, and both have access to the outdoors. The mid-century modern house, which developed in the boom years following World War II, developed out of the early modern houses that had become prevalent in Europe in the 1920s and 30s, known as the international style. A prototypical design for the modern houses was the so-called Barcelona Pavilion that Ludwig Mies van der Rohe created as the German pavilion for the Barcelona Exposition in Spain in 1929. Like most international style designs, the Barcelona Pavilion was known for its steel columns, its taut planar walls of glass, marble, and onyx, its travertine floors, and of course its free-flowing space of an open plan under a flat slab roof. Some of the same luxurious materials will be found, as we have seen, were to be found in the Miller House. The planes of marble and onyx are carefully positioned, obviously, onyx, are carefully positioned in the plan to asymmetrically divide the spaces. Note how the slender steel columns support the flat ceiling cleanly, smoothly, full stop. In the background on the lower right is the shallow pool and a statue of The Morning by George Kolbe. The statue and the famous Barcelona chairs show that Mies used curves, but very judiciously. So, the Barcelona Pavilion was an influence on Eero, as was the Farnsworth house that Mies finished in 1951 outside of Chicago. Here again, a grid of columns supports a slab roof, while partitions floating through the space divide the open plan into various areas. The structure of the house, elevated 5 feet above the plain, emphasizes views out to the landscape. Note the columns are outside the glass, like an elegant cage. The steel structure is sprayed white, and the windows did have a shantung silk curtain treatment to afford a bit of privacy. The steel-framed one-story house is basically a void enclosed by glass and sandwiched between two planes that has defined the ultimate living pavilion for a modernist sensibility. Based on a 2-foot modular grid, the entry platform is, let me go back. The entry platform is shifted past the main pavilion with steel columns carrying both the main house and the platform. Steps, terrace, and floors were surfaced in marble travertine, soon to become the defining element of elegant modernism, especially according to Mies. Now here we come to the glass house, the Philip Johnson glass house in New Canaan. Although designed after the Farnsworth was conceived, Johnson finished his glass house first in 1949. The siting shows a knowledge of historical precedent seen, for example, in the work of German neoclassicists Carl Friedrich Schinkel in Potsdam and pavilions in 18th century English gardens. Also, it is recognized as being heavily Miesian in inspiration. Yet, Johnson has tied the house to the ground and added a steel molding at chair height, like the chair rail in traditional houses. Only here, the dado, I'm going to go back a minute, the dado in the lower level of the lower part of the interior wall is transparent. Here, the house on this ledge seems to occupy that ledge in a way that the German neoclassicists Schinkel et al. Conceived their temple-like designs high on promontories in Germany. The glass pavilion is a centerpiece, you'll see the arrow, among Johnson-designed buildings carefully sited on the property. The open plan is still contained with space swirling around, furnishings and objects. A dark brick cylinder containing the fireplace chimney and the bathroom pierce the volume. The painting of the Burial of Phocion, attributed to Poussin in 1649, in the living area seems to emphasize the fact that nature, viewed from the windows of the dark steel structure of the house, is held within the frame like a painting. Raw silk screens protect the interior from sunlight, but to really get some sleep, Johnson built an inward-turning solid brick house across the lawn. After the war, Eero Saarinen got involved in the Case Study House program, which was organized by John Intensa for Arts and Architecture magazine in 1945. The idea was to create low-cost modern houses, such as this Case Study House number 8, designed by Charles and Ray Eames. He wanted to create low-cost modern houses with up-to-date technology, and the program became legendary. Charles Eames, a friend of Eero's from Cranbrook days, designed Case House Study 8 in 1949 for himself and his wife and collaborator Ray Eames in the Pacific Palisades of Santa Monica. Initially, Eero worked on the design with Eames, but it was changed a lot during the construction by Charles and Ray. Two double-height pavilions, one for living, the other for a studio, employ industrial prefab components of steel, glass, and cement board according to a module. Filled in with Eames designs, it is also given color and variety by a profusion of objects. As we see here with the living room, and where Charles and Eames are seated in front with the mezzanine behind. As the plan shows, Eames had separated the two rectilinear structures by an open terrace, an open courtyard, to afford some private space in between the two. And the reason they needed some sort of privacy between those two was next door was the Eames house Next door to the Eames house was the case study 9 house, designed by Eero Saarinen for John and Tenza in 1949. The glass and steel square house hides the structure with a plaster and wood paneling on the interior. A lot of Eames furniture has appeared here, but not so many tchotchkes. The Saarinen case study house anticipates, as you can see, here's the plan, and here it is in black and white, anticipates the Miller house in its 1-story height and the way the house looks out over a swath of land to the water. Here, 4 steel columns provide the structure, while 16 were needed for the Miller house. But before we go to the Miller house, let's go to Muskoka, Ontario, Canada, and see the house that Saarinen designed for the Millers in 1952. He didn't just do a glass house. He had known Irwin Miller because of the architectural projects that Eliel, his father, had been involved with in Columbus, and where Saarinen, too, was designing. Eero's first house commission then was actually for the summer cottage in Canada, in Muskoka, where the Miller family had summered for at least 65 years. As Will Miller, son of Irwin, has pointed out, Eero deliberately designed the house to be a regional version of modernism. Interestingly, this was an approach that Bay Area architects in Northern California had been exploring at that same time. And this particular house had a regular 2-pronged plan melded into the topography of the site. Alexander Gerard worked on the interiors, where vernacular regional materials and techniques such as board and batten siding, stonework, and uninsulated construction could be seen inside. The ceiling was an open joist, but as Will Miller has pointed out, the simplicity of the ceiling is deceptive. As the span of the joist increases, the joists had to be placed progressively closer together. Gerard worked closely with Xenia Miller on the materials and colors in this house, another collaboration that would continue in the Columbus, Indiana house. And now I'm going to go to the context of a more formal, historical, theoretical legacy that spawned the Miller house. Aaron Schiller, a graduate student at Yale in architecture and the grandson of Irwin and Xenia Miller, has been working on this formal analysis of the Miller house in terms of its 9-square plan and its column grid. He has given me permission to use some of his analysis, but I should warn you, I am only presenting just a percentage of his work to illustrate certain ideas that can be and should be taken into consideration in appreciating Saarinen's design for the Miller house. Schiller's investigation takes us first back to Andrea Palladio, the 16th century Italian architect whose villas in the Veneto have become classical standards of proportion, simplicity, and rhythm. This is not the first time that the Miller house has been compared to Palladio, however. When Architecture Forum published the Miller house in Columbus in 1958, the anonymous writer compared its plan to the 9-square grid, particularly seen in the work of the Villa Rotunda, which we have up on the screen. Schiller doesn't agree with Forum's implication that the house was palatial, like Palladio's, but does agree that the 9-square grid, a legacy of Palladio, underlies the Saarinen house as well. Schiller points out that the 9-square plan shows the fewest subdivisions one can make to a square or rectangle that disrupts the non-hierarchical symmetry by generating a center. So at the heart of the 9-square grid, Schiller says, is centrality and interiority. And by interiority, he means it focuses inwardly on the center. And so let's see where we can see how this was transmuted by Saarinen. Although Kevin Roach, who worked closely with Saarinen on the Miller house, says that Palladio was not on their minds, Mies was. It should be noted that relating modern formal devices to certain classical precedents and relating Mies to Palladio was very much in the air in the late 1940s and 1950s. After Rudolf Wittkover's landmark book Architectural Principles in the Age of Humanism, published in England in 1949, dissected the Renaissance plans and proportions of Palladio and his various villas. Colin Rowe, architect, critic, and educator, began in that same period, the late 40s, to write about modern architecture by Mies, Le Corbusier, and others who showed a strong affiliation with earlier Renaissance and Mannerist architecture. His work appeared in Architectural Review, an English magazine, and was widely read here. At this time, in the States, the general ideology had modernism going in a totally new direction without classical architectural ideals of symmetry, rhythm, and mass. I should add that Peter Eisman, a mentee of Rowe and an architect, educator, and critic of the current age, has continued that investigation into Palladio and into modernism today. These are some of the drawings that Aaron Schiller has done to show how Saarinen did play with the Palladian grid. As you can see, that both at Palladio's Villa Malacontenta, the lines are a little bit light, and the rotunda have centralized circulation, structure, and geometry while using symmetry to focus and control the plan. And as you notice, Schiller in this compilation has included a plan of the 9-square grid of the Exeter Academy Library, 1972, by Louis Kahn, just to illustrate how much that formal organization of space was in the air in the post-war years in this country when modernism reigned. But it was always transformed, and even by Louis Kahn, not just left as an historical given. So it's not surprising that the Architectural Forum might see an interesting comparison in 1958 between Palladio and Saarinen. I suspect that the unnamed writer was Walter McQuaid, a trained architect on the staff of Forum, who had written about Saarinen during those years. He noticed that the 9-square grid in both the Miller House and the Villa Rotunda, Saarinen had established 4 functional zones, as we see here, at the perimeter of the house. By the way, 3 follow the proportions, as you can see, of the golden section rectangle, a classical favorite. And 1 is 2 squares joined side by side, and that's would be for the guest room and then the carport, what was the guest room and the carport area. These rectangles hold the corners while space flows freely around them. Schiller takes this advice even farther in his study, but I'll drastically simplify it by saying that a figure-ground relationship is in flux, and it has, as he says, moving constantly between the voided space and the rectangles deployed around the plan. Forum described it as a pinwheel of space. And one aside, Monkhouse has pointed out in the book that the 9-square grid was used first by Eero Saarinen in 1954 in the bank that we saw earlier for Irwin Miller, the Irwin Trust, Irwin Union Trust, here in Columbus, not here, in Columbus. The Miller House's relation with the landscape can be seen in this perimeter terrace edging the house, and second, in the intermittent way the plan always opens up to the views and access to the outdoors. In this way, it contrasts interestingly with the Farnsworth house and the Glass House. Each of those houses emphasized glazed perimeter walls so that the outdoors could be brought indoors, although, as Schiller notes, with 2 different attitudes. The Glass House, he argues, is hermetically sealed, and since Johnson pulled the columns inside the frame, and that's in our upper right, while the Farnsworth house, Mies used his I-beams as columns placed, as I said before, along the edge of the rectangle outside the glass. In another way of talking about it, Farnsworth is more about opening up to the outside, while Johnson treats the outside as a framed painting. The Miller House had both exterior and interior landscapes in a constant dialogue. Now, Aaron Schiller has also done this incredible drawing to show further operation in which Saarinen engaged, the column-grid relationship. As this drawing illustrates, the house is a rectangle so that the grid, based on a 5-foot module, divides into bays with 19 modules on the long east-west sides and 16 on the north-south. It also sets up a rhythm not unlike Renaissance proportional systems. BBB on the short end, be here. And I think this is probably the grid is dropping out a little bit in the middle, but it's a grid and there are columns right here and here, right here if you can see that. Anyway, it's BBB on the short end and ACA on the long sides. Saarinen established the placement of the X-shaped steel column within this grid. The 9-rectangle grid is called out by skylights supported on C-channel girders. At each skylight intersection, the cruciform column is rotated to become an X, as we see here in the drawing on the left, that splits the I-beam into the 2 steel channels to support the roof. This is not like the Barcelona Pavilion, where the column straightforwardly comes up to the flat plane of the solid ceiling. Here, the support is dematerialized. The solid ceiling panels seem to float, we'll see this in a minute. The solid ceiling panels seem to float, and the skylights bring daylight indoors, and at night, artificial light softly enters the house. As Schiller and others have noticed, though, the ceiling panels seem to float because of that void created where a column is framed into the skylight of the grid. And this is where you have an actual structure support moving into the void, moving into a void and supporting that structure. That also, and we see it on the lower right, that also supports the perimeter canopy so that the canopy can become cantilevered out 10 feet over the terrace. How does this roof stay up? It does so with steel cruciform columns rotated to lock in to that void in an intersection of the steel grid for the skylight structure. So it's an inversion that Saarinen invented to make a light structure out of a massive Palladian one. Now I'm showing an X anometric that Aaron Schiller created, and he has a whole explanation, entire explanation about the black and red you'll see in the drawing, but I'm not going to go there. For the sake of time, I'm just showing you the axonometric so that you can see the interior partitions of the various zones of the house. And we have the children's zone in the upper left. We have the parents' sleeping quarters in the upper right. We have, again, the guest bedroom and the servant's bedroom in the lower left and the kitchen in the lower right. The reason I want to show this is because I'm going into the next perspective, the third historic perspective of the house, how it was experienced by the users, that is Betsy Miller and Will Miller. While the axonometric is still on screen, I'd like to bring in the conversation pit, which we see in the square. And it lies between the parents' bedroom and the children's quarters. Will Miller has said that the conversation pit was most popular with the kids. At age 10, one could run from the dining table and get a complete flip-off landing on your feet on the floor of the pit. He remembers. This doesn't look that easy, but Will also says it served as a holding tank for slumber parties. You could get about 7 friends in the pit with sleeping bags, but since it was right outside the parents' bedroom, that put a damper on it. But he adds, if you were running from the bedroom area to the kitchen, you could do a quick bouncy shortcut through the pit if mother wasn't looking. And this, I want to go back. This is not easy. This is like that way. So they'd have to be very acrobatic. And I guess they didn't really ruin the furniture, did they? So both Will and his sister Betsy, remarked that the conversation pit was not a favorite of Irwin Miller, and who always had trouble with his balance going down the steps because he'd had polio in 1948. Will says, actually, that he could count on his fingers the number of times the pit was used. But nevertheless, I want to point out that Alexander Gerard suggested that they paint the undercroft of the piano, the Steinway, baby grand over there on the right, paint it red because you could see it from the pit. So they did take care of that, although Will says it probably wasn't that necessary. In later years, because of as the Millers got older, Kevin Roach designed a handrail, but it still didn't solve everything. Nevertheless, during thunderstorms, Betsy and Will remember it was the best place to be because of those grid of skylights and that lightning coming in. Betsy spent much of her childhood in the house, but before they moved there, they were living in a white brick colonial in town, which is not to be confused with Irwin Miller's boyhood home, a dark Victorian house very near the I.M. Library. Betsy emphasizes the role that her mother played in the design of the house. Although Irwin Miller is recognized for his architectural patronage, Betsy maintains that Xenia was extremely visual and practical in matters of function, and it should be remembered that when we're talking about the Farnsworth and the Johnson houses, the clients were single. Here a family of 7 was involved, and the house, although it was 8,000 square feet, you had to take a lot of things into consideration. So Xenia played a strong role in the specifics of Gerard's interior design, and while Gerard helped Xenia become visually literate, Betsy says, her mother was intensely involved in the scouting and selection of art, including collecting, which by the 1970s featured art by Monet, Barnard, and Picasso. Betsy also remembers a Rothko that hung by the conversation pit when she was growing up. Yet she does underscore the fact that her parents were collectors of art to live with, not just to have. The music stand, here we have some more of the collections. This is shown in the sitting room off the master bedroom that Irwin Miller used. And here we go back to the living area. The acoustics were excellent because of the hard surfaces and helped the family musicales. All of them played instruments. And Betsy also remembered loving the wood, the marble walls. It's a rough marble, some kind of a bush-hammered finish, we're not sure, but very, very, very elegant. The slate cladding, the terrazzo floors, and the skylights. Still around at the age of 10, she said, she was embarrassed by the house. It was different, and the whole town talked about it. Later, however, she appreciated her bedroom's floor-to-ceiling wall overlooking the floodplain and the easy access it allowed her to sneak out of the house to join her friends. She did miss the white brick colonial, but notes she and her siblings learned so much about the building process that they were always very much interested in architecture after that. Irwin Miller had a deep interest in architecture, as we know, but Betsy points out that he definitely encouraged Dan Kiley in those alleys of trees and general landscaping. He had traveled in Europe after Oxford and loved the horse chestnuts in the long alleys that he saw in the Bois de Boulogne, among other gardens. Xenia was also interested in gardening, and here's the floodplain, the house elevated up on the promontory very much as we saw the Johnson house in a previous slide. Xenia was also interested in gardening, and since Kiley wasn't that familiar with the kind of planting that would survive well in Indiana, Betsy said that both parents played a large role in planting choices. The significance and importance of the house depends on a wealth of possible readings allowed by a work of architecture. Here it results from the refinement and the use of a modern vocabulary, innovation in building techniques, combined with an historic legacy of classical humanism in scale, proportion, and rhythm. And remarkably, it was a livable house for a large family. That glass house legacy continues to have influence today with more highly technical materials available. And here I'm showing, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. I should have shown the perimeter terrace with the cantilevered canopy and more of the floodplain lawn. But here we have Bart Meyer's steel and glass house that he completed last year for a family in Montecito, California. The steel frame is exposed, and it includes roll-up walls. The indoor-outdoor connection is emphasized so that at some point, as you see in this area, it becomes just one entity of outdoor and indoor spaces. The Myers house and then this house in Bahia, Brazil, by Studio MK27 are very different versions of the glass house. Here, the architect in Brazil, Marcia Kogan, has kept the red roof tile and the traditional vernacular outside and used indigenous woods and stone with folk art colors inside. Both houses reveal obvious affinities to the Miller house and even to the colorful interiors, and demonstrate that that kind of effort has strong ties to the past while being a harbinger of the future. Thank you.